Welcome to another far-reaching conversation. Today we are jumping right into FAR Part 27. This is really the bedrock of intellectual property rules in federal contracting.
It absolutely is. There are four main policy goals. The first one is very pro-innovation.
Yep.
They want to encourage the maximum practical commercial use of any inventions that come out of government contracts. They want taxpayer dollars to, boost the economy.
That makes perfect sense. They funded the research, they want the public benefit, but how does that square with protecting the companies they're working with?
And that's where goal number 2 comes in. The government explicitly states that it respects the rights in data developed entirely at private expense.
Okay, so that's the balance.
Right. The policy is to limit its demands for that data, only taking what's essential. The whole data rights structure really flows from that one objective.
So maximize public benefit, but respect private investment.
Got it. Now, what about patents that already exist, held by third parties? Does that infringement risk stop the government from awarding a contract?
Generally, no. And this is the third point, and it's a huge one. The government will generally not refuse an award just because the contractor might infringe an existing patent.
Wait a second. So if the government knows a contractor might infringe and they move forward anyway, what happens to the patent holder? They can't just stop the work, can they?
They cannot. This is because the government often authorizes and consents to the use of those inventions. And here's the real nugget. Under 28 U.S.C. 1498, the only remedy for that infringement is a suit for money against the government.
Against the government itself.
In the Court of Federal Claims.
So that's a massive liability shift. The patent holder can't get an injunction, they can't stop production or seize the contractor's equipment? Exactly. They can only go after the U.S. Treasury for compensation. This whole thing exists because the government can't let a critical mission, especially defense, get stopped by a private IP fight.
But that protection has a cost.
It does, and that leads right to the fourth objective. If you're a contractor providing commercial products, you're generally expected to indemnify the government against that patent infringement liability.
So it's a complete circle. The government shields the contractor from getting shut down, but then it makes the contractor cover the financial damages to protect the taxpayer. It's all risk management. Okay, let's move into the first corner of our triangle, patents. Specifically, subpart 27.3, we need to nail the definitions first. What exactly is a subject invention?
An invention is just anything that could be patentable. But a subject invention, that's the key term. It's any invention of the contractor that is made while performing work under a government contract.
And what does made mean? That seems like where the legal fights would start, right?
It is. Made is defined as either the conception or the first actual reduction to practice of the invention.
So it's one or the other.
Right, and that dual trigger is critical. If you thought of the idea while on the contract, even without a prototype, it's a subject invention. Or if the idea existed before, but you built the working model using federal funds, that also counts as made.
That's a very broad net. It captures any intellectual contribution from the funding. So who owns it? What's the default policy on title?
The default is that the contractor generally may choose to retain title to that subject invention.
Okay, assuming they disclose it properly.
Right. It encourages commercialization.
But the government isn't just funding the contractor's business. What rights does it always keep for itself, even if the contractor holds the title?
The government always keeps a fundamental protection, a non-exclusive, non-transferable, irrevocable, paid-up license to practice that invention anywhere in the world.
So a permanent royalty-free license.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
The government gets to use its own investment forever.
That worldwide license is huge, but there's an even bigger stick the government has.
Marching rights are the ultimate check on a contractor. They let the funding agency force the contractor to license the invention to other companies. And while they are very rarely exercised, maybe a handful of times in decades.
The threat is the point.
The threat is absolutely the point. It's the nuclear option in their IP toolkit.
What would trigger it? What makes an agency even think about marching in?
The main trigger is if the contractor fails to take effective steps to achieve practical application.
Meaning the invention is just sitting on a shelf?
Exactly. It isn't being made, used, or operated for public benefit. It can also be used for, urgent health or safety needs, or if the contractor is ignoring public use requirements, it stops a company from burying a federally funded invention.
And one last thing on patents. The preference for United States industry. This isn't just about who owns it, but where it's made, correct?
That's right. If you retain title, you have to ensure that any products using that invention are manufactured substantially in the United States.
Unless you get a waiver.
Unless you get a waiver, The investment has to create a domestic benefit.
Okay, let's pivot hard to the other two sides of the triangle, data and copyrights. Subpart 27.4. And we should probably mention this applies to executive agencies except for the Department of Defense. So first, what is data in this context?
Data here means recorded information. It includes technical data and computer software, but it excludes, routine administrative or financial stuff.
And the rights the government gets are split into three categories, all based on who paid. Let's start with the one the government likes best, unlimited rights data.
Unlimited rights are as broad as they sound. The government can use it, disclose it, reproduce it, make derivative works, distribute it to the public. Basically anything. Total control.
And when do they get that level of control automatically?
Mostly for data that's first produced during the contract. So if they paid you to write a report, they get unlimited rights to that report. And critically, it also always applies to form, fit, and function data, FFF data.
Ah, FFF data. That's the key for creating competition down the road, but it's got to have some careful carve-outs to protect contractors, what's included, and more importantly, what's excluded.
FFF data gives the government what it needs to make sure parts are interchangeable. So source, size, configuration, performance specs. But, and this is for software, it specifically excludes the proprietary guts.
Like the source code?
The source code, the algorithms, the formulas, the flowcharts.
Okay, so that's the contractor's first line of defense. They give the government the black box, but not the recipe. That leads us to the data developed at private expense. What about non-software data?
That would be limited rights data, or LRD. This is data that embodies trade secrets and was developed entirely at private expense. If the government needs it delivered, its use is heavily restricted.
How restricted? What can the government absolutely not do with it?
The biggest one is that the government cannot use LRD for purposes of manufacture. And it can't be disclosed outside the government, except for a few narrow reasons, like having an expert evaluate it or for emergency repairs.
So they can maintain the item, but not reverse engineer it to build their own.
Precisely. It protects the blueprints.
And what's the equivalent protection when we're talking about software?
That's restricted computer software, or RCS. It's for software that's a trade secret or copyrighted, also developed at private expense. The rights here are the bare minimum for government use. Meaning they can use it and copy it on the computer it was bought for, make backups, and they can modify it internally.
And if they modify it, do they get more rights to the new version?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Any derivative software they create keeps the exact same restricted rights. And crucially, the government is generally blocked from distributing that software to the public. It stays locked down.
That LRD versus RCS distinction is vital.
Okay, quickly on copyrights. If I write a manual under a contract, can I just claim copyright on it?
Not without asking first. You generally have to get permission from the contracting officer. If they grant it, which is common for things like journal articles, you then have to grant the government a paid-up, non-exclusive, irrevocable, worldwide license to reproduce and display it.
And what if that copyrighted item is software?
Same license, but with one major difference. The government's license generally excludes the right to distribute that software to the public.
So it protects the contractor's commercial market.
Got it.
Let's look back to risk management, subpart 27.2. We talked about that huge liability shield, but what about royalties? What do businesses need to be ready for?
The scrutiny on royalties is intense, and it happens early. Before an award, contractors have to provide detailed royalty information.
So the government can check if the royalties are excessive, improper, or inconsistent with government patent rights. And it's not just the contracting officer looking at it. It gets sent to the patent office for review before the contract is signed.
So it's a pre-award filter. They're making sure they aren't paying for something they already have a license for.
Exactly. And the contracting officer is required to act to reduce or eliminate any royalties that are found to be improper. It's a major point for pricing and negotiation.
When you look at all of FART Part 27, what's the single most important lesson for someone dealing with these contracts?
The essential takeaway is that IP rights in government contracting aren't really about pure ownership. They're about permissions and limitations.
Bundles of rights.
They are tailored bundles of rights. And how they're bundled depends on two questions. First, what is it? An invention, data, or software? And second, how is it paid for with federal money or private money? That funding history is the key to everything.
And I imagine that gets even more complicated with software-heavy systems, where the line between limited rights data for documentation and restricted computer software for the code itself becomes a huge point of negotiation.
It creates enormous friction. The government needs to maintain these complex digital systems, but contractors have to protect the algorithms that represent, billions in private investment. IFR Part 27 tries to draw that line, but it takes constant vigilance from both sides.
That's a fantastic way to sum up a very complex document. If you find these podcasts helpful, then reach far for that subscribe button.